Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? I hope you all had a nice weekend. And for those who have started with exam prep, I hope that's going well. Has anyone written an exam yet, or are all the exams still coming up? Oh, okay. Wow, 3 papers. Sure. I think the good thing about that is when all the exams are clumped together, it's like you start, and then you can sort of be done already. Okay, I hope everyone is really, working through that all right. And yeah, I just wish you guys all the best with the remaining papers that you have. And, very soon we will be on holiday. And yeah, we'll get the much needed rest. I think that this year has been really, really quite, I don't even know what the word, if it's interesting or difficult, or it's just been a long year. So yeah, I hope that, I'm sure you guys are looking forward to wrapping up with the academic year, and then being able to really just rest come December. Okay, so I don't know if anyone else is going to join us, but we'll just get started. All right, so as we all know, I think at this point we're all quite familiar with the process of these sessions. I think I'll just extend once more the offer for the one-on-one consultations. Just to put it out there again, as you guys are now really in the hook of exams, that yeah, you please do reach out if you need some assistance. Otherwise, there's no way for us to know that you are struggling, or for me to know that there's a particular area or section of the work that you are struggling with. But we are going to try, by all means, in our exam revision sessions, we're going to really try to answer as many questions in those sessions as possible. So I will encourage you, I think for those sessions, yes, it will be nice to really hear you guys' voices. So please do come prepared to engage verbally as opposed to textually. Yes, yes, so that we'll be doing that, and I hope that will also now really help you guys feel a bit more confident about the exams, and especially now that we would have gone through the whole study unit. So I don't think that anyone should be too surprised by any new concepts or anything that comes up in the exam. All right, so let's get started. Last week on Wednesday, we looked at Unit 8, and we covered data analysis for quantitative data, and we looked at descriptive statistics. Can anyone remind us what descriptive statistics is? What sort of the main aim of descriptive statistics is? Okay, Sandra says to visualize and organize data. Exactly. What is the nature of quantitative data? What did we say? Because today we're looking at qualitative data, so I think I want us to just highlight those differences before we start. When we hear the words quantitative data, what sort of characteristics do we immediately think of? Okay, Amy says we're descriptive statistics. I believe that is answering that. Is summarizing quantitative data into an easily readable format, such as a graph or chart. Exactly. Thank you for your answers. Right. What do we know about quantitative data? What does that look like? Okay, so data like who passed and failed an exam, or positive cases for COVID, and those who have recovered. Yeah, so that kind of data is numerical, right? So we would find that that data presents itself in numbers. So the minute you see lots of numbers as data, we know that that is a quantitative research study. And therefore a quantitative research method, quantitative data analysis methods would be used, right? Okay, so as Amy and Sandra told us, it helps us to really summarize, visualize, organize this numerical data that we've collected. And you'll remember, okay, I'm not going to go into it, but just keep in mind where this data has come from. And when we talked about our data collection methods, especially the quantitative data collection methods. All right, so what are some of the ways that we can actually organize or visualize this data? Is, like Amy so nicely put to us, is through tables and charts, right, or graphs. And so we looked at four tables and graphs. The first one being the frequency distribution table, and this table is really, if we allow the term to sort of define it for us, we're looking at how often something comes up. So how often a particular data set arises in the data. And then we looked at percentages, and we said, percentages is just a nice way to give us one number that represents the data set in relation to a particular set or unit in relation to the whole data set, right? And we know that percentages is determined by dividing the frequency of the total number of cases. So if I've got 20 cases or 20 exam scores, 20 exam scores multiply by 100, right? Cool. Yeah, so we'll divide the frequency. So if 5 students got 80%, then I'd say 5 over 20 times 100 to get the percentage of how many students got 80%. And that is really the nature of descriptive statistics. Just gives us sort of a condensed version of the data. And then we looked at some of the, we looked at graphic representations of the frequency distribution. So we looked at the tables, and we also looked at the bar graph here. We looked at the bar graph, we looked at the histogram, and we looked at the polygon, right? I hope we all know what the differences are from those three graphs, right? It's going to be important to know the characteristics of those three. And then we looked at skewness and kurtosis, and in this aspect, we really talked about, you know, the fact that your data can sort of sway towards a particular side, and that is, you know, the skewness of it. So it can either be symmetrical, where it's sort of a normal progression of there was some, yeah, it started off low and then it went high and then it went low again. Or sometimes it starts off really high and then it just filters out, it goes low, or it just starts really, really low and then there's like a shoot up of responses. So we looked at skewness there, and we highlighted that there's negative and positively skewed data set. And I'm just gonna leave that there. And if you can't really remember what that was about, please do make a note of it and go back and revise that section, and also bring it to our revision sessions when we do come across questions like this. Okay, and then we looked at the measures of central tendency. Quick one, can anyone tell us what each of these mean? So mode, median, mean. Just a one-liner from someone. I really would like to also hear from some of the other classmates. Rowan, Jessica, H, sorry, I only see the name as H, and Inga. What do you guys think? Okay, so we've got some lovely responses here. Yes, our mode is the most common occurring number in the set of values. That's very straightforward. Thank you, Amy. Our mean is the most, mean equal most, median, middle. Okay, so Sandra, I think you meant mode, right? Mode equals the most. That might have just been a typing thing there. Yeah, so mode is the most, median is, you know, the number that is in the middle of the range. Thank you, Fiona, as well for that. And then the mean is our average. All right, great. And then we looked at the measures of variability. A little bit of a more trickier one. Can anyone tell us what range, variance, and standard deviations mean? Amy, I see your hand. Is that an old hand or is it new? If there's something you want to say, you're welcome to unmute your mic. Okay. Measures of variability. If we don't remember, I think this is a good time to maybe go into the material, into the study unit. To remind ourselves, or we can chat through it a little bit more. Okay, range is the highest score minus our lowest score. Exactly. Thank you. What's our variance? Once we have our variance, we have our standard deviation, by the way. So that's a quick tip there. Okay, so it is a bit of a tricky one, but our measures of variability essentially are looking at how different our scores are from one another, right? We want to see if there's huge distinctions or huge differences between the scores, especially if you're looking at something like a class test, right? It's going to be quite important to see, what level of knowledge the students have. So if you see that very few students in the class actually got above 90 or above 80, sorry, and then the rest of the students got something like below 30, there's a huge gap there from we have 30s and we have 90s. It's not evenly distributed, or it's not spaced out nicely that we'll be able to say, well, students kind of have generally the same level of understanding. That kind of data shows us that there's a huge difference between the maybe 5 students who got 90 and the 25 students who got in the 30s. So variability essentially is showing us what is the difference between the scores. Is it a big difference or is it a small difference, right? Yes, so yes. So variance, thanks Fiona, is then, a figure that we can use to calculate how far the scores are from one another by actually taking all the scores into consideration. Because what we had said with the other measures, for example, the measures of central tendency and the range, right? We said that these measures are only taking into account, except the mean, are only taking into account a few cases, right? So your range is only looking at your highest and your lowest score. Your median is only looking at the score that's in the middle. Your mode is only looking at the one that comes up most. But we need something that's going to actually take all the scores into consideration and come up with one number, which is named the mean, that can then be used to determine how different each score is from each other. So that's what our variance is. Okay, and then I said that once you have the variance, you get the standard deviation. Standard deviation is then just the square root of, it's your variance, square root of your variance, to just bring your variance back into the unit of measurement. So if that isn't clear, we can maybe go into it in our revision sessions. All right. And then finally, we looked at relationships, and we said that, especially in quantitative, mostly in quantitative data research, there's usually the need to find the relationship between something. We want to see a cause and effect. So we want to see cause and effect. So we want to see if one thing affects the other. If this happens, does that happen? So that is called the relationship, or we call it the coefficient. Sorry, we call it correlation. Right? Correlation is the relationship between these two variables, and the term that, or the unit, the statistical unit that we use is called the correlation coefficient. And we say that the correlation coefficient ranges between what numbers? Yes, -1 and +1. So when one measures correlation, it can only be between -1 and +1. You'll never find a correlation coefficient of 2 or 1.5. That's not, they are calculating something else in that case. Right, so it is between -1 and +1, and we look at two things in particular with that. So we're looking at the sign that's in front of the coefficient. So the negative sign represents direction, right? We talked about a negative relationship and a positive relationship. Do we remember what those what the differences there are? An example of a negative relationship and an example of a positive relationship, please, if we remember. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Fiona says a negative relationship is if one goes up and the other goes down, right? Because they're going in opposite directions, and Amy's given us a nice example there. So if the more people working on a project together, the less time it will take. So we see a positive there being more people, sorry. That's, something going up, and then the less time it will take, that's time, that is something going down. So they are moving in opposite directions, which make it a negative relationship. And then a positive relationship is when they are moving. Yes, when they're moving towards the same direction. So if both of them are increasing or if both of them are decreasing. Right, so you will get a few questions like this where you kind of need to identify what's happening with, what is happening with both variables. That's how you'll determine if it's a positive or negative. Right, so back to our I cannot talk today, sorry guys. Back to our correlation coefficient. Yes, so the sign in front of that coefficient, that negative and that positive, that represents our negative and positive in terms of direction, right? It's not a -1 as in it's less than 1. It's a -1 as in it's a negative relationship. And then the number itself, the actual value, will represent the strength of the relationship. So we said that the closer to 0 that number is, then the weaker the relationship is. The closer to 1, then the stronger that relationship is. So what would a negative, I'm just putting it in the chat, 85 correlation coefficient be? Tell me about the strength and the direction. Okay, fairness is a strong opposite relationship. Okay, so you want, just be mindful to use the exact terminology. So you'll say it is a strong negative relationship, right? And what about is a very strong. Okay, I think you just maybe forgot the 0 there. Yes, -8. Yes. What about -0.3? Okay, it's a negative weak. Exactly. So ideally, it is a moderate relationship if it's at 5. If it's below 5, it's weak. If it's above, I mean, and here we're talking about 0.5, right? So if it's at 0, there's no relationship. I don't know if there is. Maybe you can make a sort of a note for yourself. Yeah, or I can put something together for in our revision sessions, but let me type it out. So 0 equals no relationship, right? A relationship below 0.5 equals weak relationship. Above 0.5 equals strong. Yeah. So yeah, I think a good way to think about it is how close to 1 is it? So if it's at 1, that's a very strong relationship, right? So if it's a 7, we can say it's a relatively strong relationship, right? Because it's close to 1. But if it's at 1, then we know it's absolutely strong relationship. And remember, in this case, whatever sign is in front of it doesn't matter. The sign doesn't affect the strength of the relationship. I think some students get confused because they see -1 and they immediately think, oh, that's weak, because, from our maths lessons, we know that anything below 0 is less, right? Or it's negative. So here the sign only determines strength, it doesn't determine value. I hope that's clear for us. Okay, so we've spent quite more time than I expected we would on that recap, but I do hope that it's been helpful. So we're going to move on to today's session. If there are any questions, please, like I said, feel free to just put it in the chat. All right. Okay, so today we are on study unit 9. It always feels so nice when we get to this point of it, because you realize that you've gone through an almost 300-page study unit, and it's quite an achievement. I still get excited about things like that. So I hope you're feeling proud of yourself as well for having read through, we're now at 200, so having read through about 230 pages. Okay, so we looked at now quantitative data last week, and today we're looking at qualitative data. So what do we think? So the purpose essentially of qualitative data really ties in with, the description that we learned about qualitative data. Oh, I'm so glad. Yes, it is. The study unit is very, very detailed, and there's so much information. I think it's almost impossible to absorb everything at once. So I'm glad that you found these sessions helpful to kind of break it down and chunk it up nicely. Right. So, sorry, I do not know what's happening with my voice today. All right. Yes, so as I was saying, the purpose of qualitative data analysis ties in quite nicely with our description of what qualitative data itself is, right? So we know that qualitative research, or from our earlier discussions, we know that it is, the role of qualitative research was really about finding, the meaning and finding solutions to societal problems, but in a more meaning-centered way. So sorry, I just need to close my door. Excuse me. All right, sorry about that. Yes. So then qualitative research is any type of research that produces findings or data that is not arrived by statistical procedures. Basically, it's saying it's data that collects, it's research that collects data which is not numbers, which is not numerical in nature. And we know that the qualitative research is really interested in understanding the lived experiences and the emotions and feelings and interpretations of people, of groups, of society. So it's about really trying to delve into the more inner core of society and understanding how people experience life, in their various cultures or countries or religions. So really qualitative research is so broad and it wants to give a voice. And I think that's important. It really wants to give a voice to the people that they are studying, because it understands that how you experience a particular situation will always be different to how someone else experiences that same situation. And as a result, it's important for those voices to come out. All right. So yes, that is what qualitative research is. And then the role of the qualitative researcher, we find that the qualitative researcher is really interested in understanding how people interpret their situations, how people interpret the things that are happening to them, how they make sense of it. That becomes so important for the qualitative researcher. So with this, we can already see that the mindset is very different from, for example, a quantitative researcher who's really trying to be very objective, get the facts, go in, get my exam scores, or go in, get the statistics, go out and analyze and make recommendations and predictions. The qualitative researcher wants to go in, understand, speak to people, and use their research to let people's voices come through, to fight in a way for marginalized groups, for people that would not necessarily have gotten a voice. So the research actually, you find that a lot of qualitative researchers actually have this sort of activism towards their approach, because they want something good to come out of their research, something that's going to be it won't be tangible, but it will make your participants feel quite valued and good to know that someone has heard their plight, someone has heard their story, and now there's a chance of people actually, their story is going to government or people who can make a change. So that's really the role of the qualitative researcher, right? So it's about understanding the perspective of people. So to that, we then understand then how qualitative data analysis looks like, right? If my focus is on understanding how you experience your life, can I say Fiona, right? I want to understand how you experience your studies as a UNISA student. And I get all this data. I can't just now take this data and go put numbers in it, because someone looking at that won't be able to see or to get your perspective, right? Therefore, when we're working with qualitative data, it and then becomes important, or the perspective of the researcher is that I need to make sure that these people's voices come through, right? That stories come through even in the analysis. So what is, qualitative data analysis? We are told that it is when we're working with data, organizing it, breaking it into meaningful units, synthesizing it, searching for patterns, discovering what is important, what is to be learned, and deciding what to tell others. So it's quite a process. I think what people sometimes think is that with qualitative data analysis, I'm just going to take what you guys all said, and then I'm going to sort of summarize it, and there's my research. No, it actually is it requires a little bit more depth. It's really trying to find patterns, see, okay, Fiona said this, and then Jessica said that. Does it coincide? Oh, but and then Sandra actually said this, and this matches with what Fiona said. So what can I deduce from that? What judgments can I make based on that? What did Jessica mean when she said this? So the qualitative research is actually trying to use, and we'll look at this in a later point, but when they're interpreting the data, it's not just what the data says, but it's also what their own sort of understanding of it. But it also needs to be connected to the literature. Otherwise, it's just an opinion piece. Okay, and we're told that it is an inductive process. We should all know what at this point inductive is, right? Yes, no. So I'm going to say yes, because I think we all do. What I want to know is, can someone give us an example of an inductive process in qualitative research? So you say you've done a qualitative research study now. How would you use induction to analyze your data? Right, so your personal experience will allow you to formulate a general principle. Exactly. Thanks, Amy. So yes, exactly, that's it, because with qualitative data, we are looking at specific cases, right? So I'm speaking to specific students, or I'm, doing field work in a specific church or a specific youth group. So I'm going to take the experiences of that youth group, and then in my analysis and go in and connect what I've observed, the data that I've collected, with my interpretation and what the literature has says, and I'll put that together, and I'll be able to, and I'll come up with a principle or a theory even, or not necessarily a generalization, because qualitative researchers are not really trying to generalize. They're just trying to shine a light on a particular thing. Of course, you want at the end of the day to develop some sort of principle about it, but you're not necessarily saying that, oh, all UNISA students feel this way, just because 5 students that you spoke to feel that way. So the qualitative researcher is more going to say, based on the data that I got, this was the general consensus from the students that I spoke to, and so and then we can maybe assume that there are other students who feel like this, but we're not now straight out saying, therefore, all other UNISA students feel like this, right? Okay. So we have said now that it is a non-numerical process of examining and interpreting data in order to elicit meaning, to gain understanding, and to develop empirical knowledge. So that's that empirical knowledge that we get at the end of it, that principle that we have formulated, or that recommendation or that suggestion that we've formulated at the end of this process. And we're told that it also involves dissecting masses of information. And yeah, so the thing with qualitative data is you'll get a lot. Even if you only speak to 5 students, if you're doing one-on-one interviews, though you will get a lot of data, especially if it's like a 1-hour interview. So you kind of get a lot of data because a lot can be said in 1 hour, and one has to, you know, go back and transcribe that 1 hour. And that is so much work. Can I just say transcription is not fun because you'd have even a 5-minute clip and it'll take you up to 2 or more hours to transcribe. So yes, essentially from one interview you could have about 20 pages of data, of, you know, of transcribed data. So it is a lot of information, and you end up, because you're working with people, you find that not everything is relevant. So you kind of have to like sift through a lot of information to get to, you know, the point, or to get to what it is you're actually looking for, to make interpretations on, right? Are there any questions so far? Okay, I think we are all good. Okay. So then we're asked about sort of when in the research process do we start data analysis? What do you guys think? When would you, if we think about the research process and we've now gone through most of the steps now, where do you think would be a good time to start this process, this activity of data analysis? Okay. So Amy says when patterns emerge in the data collected so far. Right. Oh, no, I was asking when do we start? When do we start data collection? Sorry. Sorry, data analysis. When do we start data analysis? Just from your opinion, even like if you think about, okay, the stages of our research, we've identified our problem, we've went through our theories and literature, we have our research design, we collect our data. Yeah, where do you think we would then start analyzing our data? Okay, Amy, you're saying as the research is conducted. Okay. Yeah, I think you guys are a bit ahead of me here. Yes, so I think generally, when we think about it without maybe looking at the study unit, the general assumption would be that, oh, I'm going to start analyzing my data once I've collected my data, right? So at the end of data collection, then I'll start analyzing. It sort of feels like the natural progression. But yes, as you guys said, that we are presented with 3 different theories or approaches to when data analysis, should start. So let's just maybe go through them. The first one is, I'm on page 140. The first theorist tells us that data analysis is always an ongoing process that routinely starts prior to the first interview. So they're telling us that really, you kind of start already analyzing your data before you even go into your first interview, right? And then the second theorists tell us, which is Stroybert Special, sorry, I'm butchering that name, and Computer. So they're saying that the process of data analysis starts when the process of data collection begins. So essentially they're saying the minute you start collecting your data, you start analyzing it at the same time. Do we get that? Do we see how that can happen? Right, so they go on to explain that, listen, while you are actually doing your interviews, once you're actually collecting your data, you're not sort of, your brain isn't shut off to analyzing, because even as you're sitting in an interview with someone and you ask a question and they answer, your brain is making connections, right, between what this person is saying versus what the other person said in another interview, or what this person is saying and a theory that you read. That process of analysis is already happening in your brain. So you may not be physically doing the analysis, but you're already making connections, and that's the point of data analysis, to make those connections, to find and try to find patterns and try to find meaning. So essentially, these theorists are saying it's happening together at the same time. Right. And then the third theorist said, where's the third one? I think it was Creswell. Creswell says that actually this data analysis happens not just when you're doing data collection, but when you're doing data collection, when you're doing data interpretation, and when you're doing your report writing. So through all these stages, you're actually analyzing. And I see that because, like I said, when you're collecting your data, your brain is already making those connections and identifying those patterns. When you are interpreting, right, of course, now it's part of your analysis. So now you are sort of actively doing the analysis, but also when you're writing up your report, because as you write, you get like more ideas. You get ideas and you start seeing things connect and things not connect. So up to the point of actually writing your report, you're still sort of analyzing your data. It doesn't stop, is what this theorist is telling us. So that's what the theorists are telling us about data collection. And I have seen a tricky question, maybe not so tricky, but sorry, I have seen a question come up where they're like, which one is most accurate? Data collection begins when, da 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 da. So yeah, I would advise to just read through this section quite carefully in case something like that comes up again. Okay, so they're telling us this is what the theorists have said. Fine, it makes sense. We can either accept it or reject it. But in practice, or the practical approach is that people usually... Okay, cool. Okay, so we're told that in practice, the data analysis only actually occurs when data saturation becomes noticeable. Right, so in other words, when multiple interviews have been conducted and observations have been made and patterns and themes start recurring, no new information emerges, the data on then said to have achieved saturation. So we know data saturation just means that if we just think of the words itself, if something is saturated, it's full. So there's sort of no space for anything else. So nothing new is happening in this data. So that's what the practice says. So I think just make a note of what the theories say, the theorists are saying versus what actually happens in practice, right? That may be important for us to note. All right. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so it's with these theories, it's not that anyone is wrong or anyone is right. It's just that these are the theories that are presented. I have seen quite a few questions where we're asked to identify the incorrect statement, and they give you all these theories. So none of the theories are wrong. They're just different approaches. The difference would be what's the practical, what happens practically when we're talking about the start and stop of data analysis. All right. Okay, to move on. So now we want to look at how exactly do we analyze it, because if we start thinking about what we've just said, we said, okay, the researcher really wants the people's voices to be heard. They want to understand how people experience things, how they make meaning of it. And of course, as a result, they want that to come through in their research and in the analysis of that data. But we've also now been told that, listen, you're going to have a lot of data with qualitative research. You're going to be faced with pages upon pages of transcripts. And the more data you've collected, it's almost impossible to get to all of that data. But you need to analyze this data. So what do we do? So we're told that before we even go into, we're told that there's really no right way to analyze data. And I think that if we think about our research designs, it makes sense, right? We can't really, what's the word? We can't really prescribe a particular way for a researcher to do something if it doesn't fit with their if it doesn't fit with their research. So the way that a researcher is going to decide to analyze their data really depends on the design of their research. It depends on the topic that they're using. It depends on the theoretical basis, or the theoretical, what's the word? Why can't I speak today? The theoretical framework that they are using. So because there's no right way, it gives the researcher a sort of options to, or leeway to work within. But this doesn't mean it shouldn't be a systematic process, because at the end of the day, it's still research, and research by definition is a systematic process of, obtaining information. So how do we ensure that a qualitative research project has a systematic data analysis process? There are actually some guidelines which are used, but before we go into that, we are told that, you know, with qualitative data, it's really not a linear process, right? With our quantitative data, remember we said you have to collect all your data first before you can actually analyze, because, you know, all the numbers aren't going to change somewhere along the way, right? You get all your data and then you can analyze it. You can do the calculations because it's going to be difficult for you. You've done your calculations, you've calculated your mean and all of that. And then, you know, tomorrow you're like, actually, I need to get more data. That's going to throw everything that you've done out, because the numbers all affect each other. So now you're going to have to calculate a new mean because you've added new data, and everything else will have to be adjusted. And it reminds me of, I did accounting in high school. And it reminds me of accounting because the minute you get one thing wrong, everything goes haywire. So you get one number wrong, it changes everything. So that's the same with quantitative data. But with qualitative, it's a bit more flexible because it's not that what Fiona's response is somehow going to change what Amy said. You know, it can't really affect it in that way. It can only affect my interpretation of it, but then I can still present both views. You know, it's not that, okay, now something has happened and now the data is all messed up. So as a result, you can actually go back in the qualitative research. You can collect data, start analyzing, realize, oh, I didn't get enough about this particular topic, go back into the field, collect more, come back and analyze. So it's a cyclical process with overlapping phases in which the researcher moves back and forth between different levels. So I think we also begin to understand that qualitative data analysis can be very lengthy and quite a messy process, because you're reading so much text from, you know, different perspectives from different people. It can get quite messy and can get quite overwhelming. So this is why it then becomes important especially for the qualitative researcher, to develop or to establish a plan on how to analyze their data, you know, something more systematic that can guide them. Otherwise, if you're going to say, if you say, I'm just going to read and see what comes up, it's not going to be very effective, because you'll read and highlight things and not be able to connect things together, and you'll get so lost, because if you have 20 pages for one interview, by the time you get to page 19 or page 17, for example, you've probably forgotten what was on page 1. And if you're going to the next, you pick up the next interview, how sure are we that you're going to remember what the first interview said, and, you know, be able to connect or find patterns and connect the dots there. So that's why it's important to actually have some sort of system in analyzing even qualitative data. All right. So how do we go about doing that? Okay. So and then before we then start. So, okay, the sort of the framework that we're going through now is just a recommendation of how a qualitative researcher can actually go about analyzing their data. Again, it's not a fixed way. It's not because there's no right way, but it's just sort of a template that can be used. So before you actually go into analyzing your data, it is important to first organize, the same way that we did in quantitative data, where we used mean, median, mean, and variance, and the tables to organize our data. You need to do the same for your qualitative data, just to make sense of it all, so that everything's in the place that it's meant to be. So the organization and preparation of data for analysis involves like transcribing your interviews, like I said, which takes like years. And it has to be word for word. This is what makes it such a tedious process. has to be word for word, scanning material. So if you've collected books or journals and that's your data, remember we talked about if you've got existing data, if you're using existing data, making sure that you've scanned, you've gotten all that material. Typing out field notes. If you were out in the field, you made handwritten notes most likely because you had a book and a pen that you carried everywhere. Having to now type all those notes out so that you can have basically one central place to view everything. And then sorting and arranging the data into different types depending on the sources of information. So if you've got interviews, you sort that and say this folder has all the interviews, this folder has my field notes, this folder has whatever other type of data that you've collected. And then we're just sort of given a tip that in terms of your transcript, that the format of it must actually be such that it facilitates easy reading. So ideally, you want to have an adequate font size and have enough space on the sides to make the notes, because this is where you're going to really jump into the analysis when you are actually reading through your transcripts. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Any questions? No. Okay. Just a note, Adele has posted in the chat, when you have a moment, to please tell us about your exam experience, and if you prefer the online exams to the venue-based exams. So maybe as we wrap up, I'd encourage you to maybe start thinking about this. Please put it in the chat. We really need this kind of feedback so we know, what the best way to go forward is. As we know, the online exams is a new thing for us. So yeah, we really just want to make sure that we are being as accommodating as possible and supporting you guys in the best way that we can. So yeah, thanks Adele. Please think about that, guys, and I'll remind you further when we're closer to the end to also just put your thoughts down. Okay, thanks. Okay, so the steps, I'm going to give a very broad overview of the steps, because again, it's more recommendations as opposed to an actual step-by-step process that one absolutely must go through. Okay, so the first step is to format. It tells us that the format of the transcript must be as such that it would facilitate easy reading, and I think that sort of flows from what I just mentioned. Ensuring that your transcript, or the thing that you're actually going to be engaging with as you work through your data, is easy for you to read. It has enough space for you to make comments. And that, however that looks like, is up to you as a researcher. So in the next step, you want to basically select one document or one piece of data, and they say that this can be sort of the most interesting one for you, or the shortest, or the one at the top of the pile, and it's just to get some momentum going. So if you pick up the one that's most interesting, you're most likely to stay engaged and to stick through it, as opposed to, or the shortest, because you're like, okay, this is the shortest, I can quickly start and feel like I have gotten somewhere. So yes, and as you're going through that transcript, this is where the analysis is really about asking questions. You as a researcher asking yourself questions about the data, about what the data is telling you, and about how it relates to what other pieces of data have told you, and how it relates to theory. So you're essentially always trying to make connections in your head as you're reading. So you think about, what is this about? What's the content of the data? What's the context of the data? You think about, what the meaning could be. So this is the tricky part, because there's no right or wrong answer. with qualitative research. Of course, it must be grounded in some sort of thinking, in some sort of theoretical thinking, but I can't say that, oh no, you were wrong, she didn't mean that, unless I actually went and spoke to the participant, which obviously I wouldn't because it was your research, right? So no one can say that, oh no, you interpreted this wrong, because it's based on your perspective as a researcher and your interactions with the participant. So yeah, you really start thinking about the what, the whys, the hows, and write those down on the margin of your transcript. And then the next thing is you go into, once you've done this for a few of the participants or a few interviews, you make a list of all the topics. So as you're reading, the what is this about is going to be basically your topics, right, that are going to be coming out. I mean, the more that you read, you'll definitely start noticing that, okay, all the students mentioned, accessing the campus being a problem. That's a topic. So you can start pulling out topics from your data. You can see that, okay, this comes up a few times, and then you'll be able to group them as this is a major topic, or as in it always comes up. This is a unique topic, or this was interesting, it came up once or twice, and then you've got the leftover topics, which maybe only one student mentioned, or two students, and it's sort of just left over. So once you've got your topics, and this is a really nice system, because it sort of takes you step by step through how to make sense of a large set of data, which is what we will always have with qualitative data. So once you've got your topics, you can assign each topic an abbreviation or code, right? So instead of writing, students said that access to campus was a problem, you can have that be access to campus, or A to C. Oh, that sounds cool. You can have A to C, and that be a code. And you write the codes next to the data. So now every time you're going into your data again, and you see a student, one of the participants had talked about their struggles with accessing campus, you can just put A to C there, because you know what that means, and you know that that's one of the major topics that stems from your data. All right, and then once you've got that, we need to make a descriptive wording of your topics. So basically, we got a topic, we coded the topic, and now we need to basically describe the topic, right? So a descriptive wording of your topic and turn them into a theme. So the lack of access to campus plays a role in da-da-da-da. Then that becomes your theme, right? Or your category. And so you'd be able to group, every time something like that comes up, you're able to group it in that theme. And the themes ideally would actually become your headings in your write-up. So your themes are your headings. And the nice thing is you'd be able to pull from not all, but you'd be able to pull from the different participants speaking about one thing in this way. So it's not just like I'm writing about access to campus as a theme, but I'm only quoting one participant. In this way, you're able to actually quote maybe 5 participants who actually talked about the same thing. And that really strengthens whatever argument you're trying to make. Okay, and then you make a final decision on the abbreviation of each theme. Again, I guess you abbreviate it again. I'm not quite sure why this step is relevant, but I'm just following the study unit here. Alphabetize the codes. So once you've got your themes, you can then go in, cut and paste the quotes. Right now you've got your Word doc. You go in, you cut and paste all the quotes that are coded for a particular theme, and that, like I just said, basically gives you all the times that the participants spoke about this thing, and you can basically go and create your your narrative around it, knowing that you've got the quote there already, because you need to quote your participants, because I mean, that's the point of qualitative research. If we want the voices of the participants to come through and their perspective to come through, their quotes play a major role in your analysis. I can't just say students found that da 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 da, and this is really hard for them, because now I'm speaking for them. But if I have the quotes, I put the voices and say, as Fiona said, and then I put Fiona's quote so that her voice is coming through in that research. And then you say, oh, Amy, also shared the same sentiment, and then you put Amy's quote there, and then you go in and you basically discuss what this means, what are the implications, what is the theory saying. So the analysis must really be a nice mix of the participants' voices or quotes, your interpretation of the implications of it, and how it relates to your theory. So those are for anyone who will be writing a full-on research paper anytime soon. That's how I like to sort of think of it. And then finally, if necessary, you'll go and recode the existing data. If not, you start on interpreting and reporting your research. So the analysis part, I won't say it's done, but you have an idea of what your themes are. It's almost like, when we're planning our essays, you need to know sort of what you're going to speak about under each topic. So this process has helped you to be able to take that large amount of data that you collected and to code it and to basically put it in themes so that you have essentially your headings already. You know what students said about each thing, you know what the main issues are, and now you can go in and just interpret. And the interpretation is what I said, when you're now looking for the meaning of these things and how they relate to theory. Right, so then you go into your interpretation. I thought we would have time to watch this quick overview, but I see that we might not have time, so I'm just going to move on. But you are welcome to go and watch it in your own time. As you guys know, the class sessions are being recorded, so you will have access to that. Okay, so just a few final things we actually might have time for that. We might, because it's only about 5 minutes. So I think let's go and watch that short video. And then we are going to chat through sorry, that is YouTube. A few things, final things to consider for qualitative data analysis, and then we will wrap up. But I do want us to maybe just watch this quickly. Like I said, it's about 5 minutes, so yes. Just excuse me for a minute. Okay, so please let me know if you are. I think we should all be able to see.
This week we're talking about qualitative data analysis and how it differs a bit from performing quantitative data analysis. If you're a bit confused between the two terms, check out last week's video when we compared quantitative versus qualitative data. In short, qualitative data is data that normally has words as a description and not numbers. So colors are a perfect example of qualitative data. Qualitative data analysis lets you find patterns or themes within your data. It may not have a numeric value tied to it by description, but this doesn't mean that you can't analyze, examine, and find insights about your data, even though it's words. Analysis of qualitative data can also be used to explain different phenomena that are observed. The most challenging part of qualitative data analysis is the initial setup. There are many different ways that you can work with qualitative data, depending on how your data is being measured or captured and what you're trying to develop or create as an outcome of your analysis work. In broad terms, qualitative data analysis is normally either approached with an inductive approach or a deductive approach. With a deductive approach, the analyst or researcher has already defined and grouped and categorized how things are going to be measured. Then the measurement takes place in this organized way. This type of approach, the deductive approach, is used when the researcher or analyst tends to know a fair amount about the subject. So they know what the typical outcomes or expected values are and where the pitfalls might be in the measurement. They can be really clear up front on how to set up the data that's going to be gathered. Because this structure exists from the start of the process, deductive approaches to qualitative data analysis tend to be a lot easier to do than inductive approaches. With an inductive approach, which you'd use if you didn't know about the topic, or maybe the data was gathered separately and you're now trying to repurpose it for something else. In this case, you, after the fact, are looking at how to group and categorize and really organize all of that data that's been collected. An inductive approach tends to assume less about the data, so it can actually end up being much more thorough, even though it can be more time-consuming. You are not predetermining results when you're gathering the data like you tend to with a deductive approach. This doesn't mean a deductive approach is bad. In some cases, there really are limited options for how things could be described or categorized, and simplifying it can make the work a lot simpler. Regardless of whether you take a deductive or an inductive approach to qualitative data analysis, there are 5 key steps to performing qualitative data analysis that differ slightly from quantitative or numerical data analysis. The first step is more exploratory. Get familiar with your data. Start to look for patterns that emerge or things that you see repeatedly happening in the information. Next, focus your analysis. What are you trying to achieve? Try to narrow in on a specific question or set of questions that you're asking of the data. This is a step you should be doing with quantitative data analysis as well. It's good to ask open-ended questions sometimes, but you can come up with very different results depending on the question that you're asking, so be careful to know what the outcome that you need or the question you're trying to answer is when you're going into this analysis. Third, categorize your data and create a structure. Organize all of this information. This may be a very quick step if you took a deductive approach and you created those categories before you gathered the data, or this could be the longest part of the process if you took an inductive approach and weren't quite sure what to expect in the information. This step can also be called coding or indexing, and depending on what question you're trying to answer, this could look different. For instance, if we talk about hair color and something's being analyzed on hair color, you could only be interested in people that have brown hair and other qualities that they have. In that case, instead of including just a generic hair color as one of your different variables, you could have a yes or no or a 1 or 0 for hair color. It's either brown, yes, or it's not brown, no, and it doesn't matter if it's blonde or black or something else, it's still a no. Fourth, it's time to identify patterns and make connections. This is where you'll typically pull in an analytics tool, whether it's Python, R, SAS, or even just using Excel. Here, looking for themes or relationships between themes in the data. The fifth step is interpreting the results. Any analyst is most powerful when they're giving the meaning behind the information. You need to create context to that analysis you just performed so it can be shared with others, explained to others. In this stage, you're often doing data visualization, but also providing brief explanations to give context and meaning to all of the patterns and themes that you may have identified. This makes it easy for someone that's not really familiar with the research to understand the outcome of the research. Those are the 5 key steps to performing qualitative data analysis. There is a lot of overlap with quantitative data analysis, but you notice some differences, like the coding process, which is often different than quantitative data. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up.
All right, so I hope that gave us a little bit more context. I mean, she kind of repeated what I said, but yes, I think it's always nice to always sometimes hear another voice saying the same thing, and repetition anyway is really one of the tools for retaining information. So cool. I hope that was useful. Okay, so I did mention already, but that when we go into our interpretations, we understand that the interpretation isn't found in the data, right? But the but they are made, right? So we make interpretations throughout the research process. So your interpretations would have started from the get-go, and as you're working through your research, as you're collecting theories, framing your theories, collecting your data, analyzing your data, it all sort of comes together as an interpretation to your studies, and then you're able to basically present your findings. Another thing that, and I just wanted to mention it because it does come up in exams, or I have seen it come up in some exam question papers, is the use of quotations and how important this is. Remember, I said that it is important for the voices of your participants to come through, right? So we'll be quoting them a lot. So we are given just a few guidelines about how to use quotations properly. And I think we can also use this in our general essay writing activities. The principle stays the same, right? So this is just on basically almost the last page of this unit. On page 250, we are told that quotations should be linked to the related context, to the related text. So in the context of writing an essay, you can't just take a quote from Mark Zuckerberg and it has nothing to do with anything in your research. So, it has to be connected to the text that you're putting it close to. The context of the quotation needs to be clarified. So if you are saying that Fiona said this about her access to campus, you need to first provide context, who is Fiona, and of course not giving information about your participants, but saying, the participant who's third year, has experienced this because that. So you sort of explain first what's happening what's happening, or the context of that quote, before you say this is what she said. Otherwise, it's not really going to come together for your reader. And then your quotation should be given an interpretation, right? Otherwise, the readers won't understand why they quote. So if I put Fiona's quote there, I need to then go in and then interpret or explain why this is meaningful, right? And so it forms part of that. Why is it meaningful? Why am I highlighting this quote? How does it relate to everything else that we're talking about in this section, right? So of course, if you are quoting 4 people about the same thing, you don't have to go in and interpret every single quotation. You can quote, then you can interpret at the end, right? And say all of these quotes highlight da 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 da. Right. So you need to give an interpretation. Otherwise, and I think if we think about our essay writing, of course, we don't just give a quote and just leave it, right? We don't just quote. Who do we usually quote? Whoever you quote a scientist or a theorist, and you just quote and move on to the next paragraph. No, you need to actually interpret that quote and say why it's relevant. Why are you putting it there? And then we're told that you need to give a good balance between quotations and your own text. So yes, we want to hear the participants' voices, but remember, we also want to see the analysis. Otherwise, it's really no different than me going to a church meeting or a youth group and speaking to the people. I'm just hearing the voices, but the point of the research and the point of us analyzing is so that we can actually get that interpretation and get the understanding. So it should be a balance between the voices, but also the analysis of the researcher, that knowledge that you actually want people to leave with after they've read that paper. And then finally, that quotations should be relatively short in length, especially in essay questions. Like, we don't want 4-line worth quotations. Cut it up, paraphrase one part of it if you can, and then the other. In terms of your research, your participants, if you say, yes, I want this participant spoke about, the story, and it was really meaningful and it's relating to the topic, what you can do is maybe you paraphrase part of it, you give the context, and then you only quote the most important thing or the thing that you really want to highlight from the participant's voice. But if you have 20 lines of this participant's story, then that's not really a good balance. It shouldn't be a super story. It's a quote, not a whole manuscript about this one participant. Yes, so that's really it. I'd encourage us to once again just go back and reread, or just maybe make notes of things that came up that you found interesting in the session. And yes, that's I think our session for today. So if there are no questions, just a reminder that on Wednesday, we are actually on our last unit of the study guide. I'm really, really proud of how well we've gone through this. So we're on unit 10 on Wednesday, and I think it's going to be a shorter session because that unit is quite short. So we'll have a short one on Wednesday, and then we'll start our exam revision on Monday next week, but we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. So yes, that's all from me. Just want to remind you guys about Adele's comment there. If you guys can please share with us your experiences about the exams. If you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat, in the public chat, Adele, can they maybe private message you on the platform? Okay, I'm not sure if Adele can hear me, but yes, please put your thoughts through in the chat, and we really need that information and that feedback from you guys. Okay, well, have a good evening. If you haven't put your student number in the chat, please do, and we will see each other, or we will hear each other. Oh, well, you will hear me on Wednesday, and then we'll take it from there. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.